All right, so today we're going to dive into something pretty profound, a psychological force that's working deep in our subconscious, and believe it or not, it influences just about everything we do. It's called terror management theory, and it all starts with one single, powerful question.
So let me just ask you this. What if I told you that there's one primal fear that secretly drives your ambitions, your relationships, your creativity, even the things that gross you out? A fear that shapes your entire life in ways you've probably never even thought about.
To really get our heads around this, we need to start with this concept of existential anxiety. The philosopher Rollo, he defined it as that deep, gnawing unease we feel whenever something that's core to our very being gets threatened. And what's the ultimate threat to our existence? Well, it's death. The terror of our own obliteration is the engine behind so much of what we do as humans.
So in this explainer, we are going to unpack this whole idea. We'll start with our unspoken fear of death. Then we'll explore how we deny our physical selves because of it. We'll look at how we find shelter in our relationships. We'll discover the surprising upside of mortality. And finally, uncover death's powerful lesson for how to actually live.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Our unspoken fear. This whole idea actually jumped from the world of philosophy into modern psychology, and it's built on a pretty radical premise, that our entire culture is just one big, elaborate defense mechanism. I mean, think about it. Thinkers like Ernest Becker argued that everything we create, our art, our religions, you name it, is really just a buffer against the terror of knowing that one day we're just gonna stop existing. And this is where terror management theory, or TMT, comes into play. It takes that huge philosophical idea and brings it right into the science lab, suggesting that our creativity and our culture are just these unconscious defenses we put up to manage that terror of death.
So how do these defenses actually work? Well, one of the strangest ways is how we deny our animal selves. Let's dig into why we try so hard to distance ourselves from our own bodies as a way to cope.
You know, the logic of TMT is actually pretty simple when you break it down into these 3 steps. So, step 1, unlike other animals, we are super aware that we're going to die. Step 2, that knowledge, if you really think about it, could be completely paralyzing. So, step 3, we manage that terror by creating and believing in these cultural worldviews and building up our self-esteem to feel like we're valuable people in a meaningful world.
And this shows up in some really fascinating ways. Researcher Jamie Goldenberg has shown that when you subtly remind people of death, they literally start to reject their own bodies. They say they're less interested in physical pleasure, they express more disgust toward bodily functions, and they really lean into the idea that they have a soul or a spirit, that they're, more than just a body.
Now, this whole distancing thing gets even more intense when it comes to women's bodies. From a TMT perspective, biological processes like pregnancy, menstruation, and breastfeeding are incredibly powerful reminders of our animal nature. Some researchers have even called this the trio of terror because these amazing life-giving functions are also just such visceral reminders that we are mortal, biological creatures.
And this study illustrates the point perfectly. Get this. In one famous experiment, a female researcher accidentally dropped something out of her bag. When it was a hair clip, people saw her as competent and likable. No big deal. But when she dropped a tampon, they rated her as less competent, less likable, and they even physically moved their chairs further away from her. I mean, it's a stunning example of how just a simple reminder of biology can trigger this deep-seated disgust and social distancing.
So while one defense is to distance ourselves from our bodies, another is to do the exact opposite, to pull other people closer. So now we're going to explore how we find shelter in other people, using connection to buffer that existential dread.
Marvin Gaye sang it perfectly. When we're faced with how fragile life is, our deep-seated need for connection, for the shelter of someone's arms, it just gets so much stronger. And this isn't just poetry, it's a core psychological defense mechanism.
The really crucial part here is why this works. It all comes down to this idea of positive regard. That's the feeling that the people we love actually care for us, that they value us. According to psychologists, we internalize that feeling, and it builds up our own sense of self-worth. It makes us feel significant in a world where we know our existence is, temporary.
And researchers have actually tested this. In a study by Cox and Arndt, they found that after reminding people about death, just having them think about a time their partner made them feel good about themselves actually lowered how accessible death-related thoughts were in their minds. It's almost like our partner's love literally pushes the fear of death away.
But, it gets a little more nuanced. Our personal attachment style, basically how we learned to connect with others as kids,
It predicts who we turn to. After a death reminder, securely attached people, they turn to their romantic partners. Anxiously attached people tend to look to their parents for that comfort. And the avoidantly attached folks, they don't seek that comfort from others at all. They just stay self-reliant.
So we've covered all the unconscious defenses we use to avoid thinking about death. But what happens when we face it head-on? This is where we discover the surprising upside of mortality and how it can actually be a huge catalyst for personal growth. We basically have two paths we can take. We can react with what some people call neurotic anxiety, which is where we just double down on denial and conformity and fear. Or we can choose courageous growth, using the awareness that we're not here forever to rise above those defenses and live with real intention. The philosopher Heidegger called this the awakening experience. You might just call it a reality check. Studies show that when people consciously think about their own mortality, they start to reprioritize what's important. They shift away from extrinsic goals, things like money and fame, and they move toward intrinsic goals, like personal growth, community, and loving relationships.
Okay, here is a truly surprising finding. When healthy people imagine facing death, they tend to use a lot of negative language. But what about people who are actually approaching death? Researchers analyzed the blog posts of terminally ill patients and the last words of death row inmates. And as death got closer, their language actually became more positive and less negative, and it often focused on social connection and love. The reality of death, it seems, is far less terrifying than the idea of it.
And get this effect doesn't even have to be conscious. In one incredible field study, people were 40% more likely to help a stranger who dropped their stuff when they were walking through a cemetery than when they were just a block away. That quiet, non-conscious reminder of mortality seemed to trigger a more pro-social, more helpful impulse in them.
So what does all this mean? Let's bring it all together and figure out death's ultimate lesson for living, and the ironic truth that's right at the heart of our existence.
The psychiatrist Irvin Yalom just captured it beautifully. Our awareness of death isn't just some curse that we have to manage with all these defenses. It can be a powerful source of motivation. It can push us to clarify our values and to actively chase a life that feels truly meaningful.
And that, right there, is the ultimate takeaway. The ironic truth is that death can actually be psychically good for life. When we have the courage to face our own mortality, we can transform that primal fear from a source of anxiety and denial into a catalyst for growth, for connection, and for meaning.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. If the awareness that our time here is finite is what gives our choices weight and our moments meaning, then how will you choose to live?